Chapter 3, Part 1. The Shadow. A jolt caused Twilight's eyes to shoot open, and she suddenly sat bolt upright with blurry vision. She gave a small groan as she placed a hoof to her forehead and tried to blink away the sand that had built up in the corners of her eyes. Her vision began to settle and clear, and with a few final blinks, she was able to give heed to her surroundings. She was still in the compartment aboard the Crystal Express, the door leading out into the rest of the carriage firmly closed with the blinds shut. Looking out the window, Twilight could see a vast landscape of ice and snow leading out in all directions, all fleeting amongst the gentle chugging of the train, intermittent with the occasional hard bump, like the one that had woken her up. Her book was sat open on the table in front of her, and she figured that at some point during the trip, she must have dozed off and slumped against the window, a theory supported by the condensation gathered around the spot on the glass where she'd been breathing onto it. Twilight couldn't be certain when it was she'd fallen asleep, only that they definitely hadn't been in the frozen north when she had. Maybe she'd been a little too excited after all, and had unknowingly worn herself out.
"Final stop!"
An announcer came in over the speakers.
"Crystal Empire!"
Hearing that, and figuring it was a bit too late to get back into her novel, Twilight packed the book away into her saddlebag and prepared for the train's imminent arrival at the station. As she did so, a shine in the corner of her eye caught the unicorn's attention and caused her to glance back out the window. Indeed, there it was. Having passed around a snowy hill, the full majesty of the Crystal Empire appeared before her. The train rumbled around a left-leaning piece of track towards a harsh transition between the snow and perfectly green grass, and passing the threshold was like stepping through a portal into another world entirely. The thankfully gentle snowfall was replaced with a bright, perfectly clear day you'd expect from an ideal summer. And there was no mistaking the sudden warm feeling that seemed to spread into Twilight's very soul. A feeling of happiness and, of course, love. Everything in the compartment where she sat almost seemed to brighten up immeasurably, and Twilight couldn't help but smile as she accepted the Crystal Heart's effects. Even without a full pulse from the magical artifact, just being within its area of effect was enough to explain why property demand was high for the ancient city. Something that gave Cadence and Shining Armor a headache, of that she had no doubt. The Crystal Empire had been back for only a matter of months, 3 of them, in fact. The Crystal Ponies who chose to remain in their lifelong home in the aftermath of King Sombra's death, and even those who elected to leave the bad memories behind, all had to acclimatize to a world 1,000 years ahead of them. Take the Crystal Express as a prime example. This newest of introductions to the city was a completely baffling piece of technology to them. Engines, electricity. She wondered how any of them would react to a place like Manhattan. From medical practices to simple school curriculum, it was all woefully out of date and even archaic in nature. It was actually quite fascinating to the scholarly unicorn, seeing as the Crystal Empire was truly a slice of a time known only to the royal sisters. But it was also one that her brother and sister-in-law had been painstakingly trying to modernize. To train the Crystal Ponies to live and work in this distant future, and to prepare them for anything they might find outside of the frozen north. Twilight had to imagine that just the knowledge of their equestrian annexation, even with Cadence's ancestry to Queen Amore, and recent ascension to be an equal ruler of Equestria alongside Celestia and Luna in light of that fact, was a lot for them to take in. Never mind anything else. And despite it all, she had to give them credit. They had adapted exceptionally well thus far, embracing new technological innovations to their city and rushing at life with an eagerness to learn all the new skills necessary. Especially those in professional positions, like doctors and guards. She had to imagine that was a byproduct of their prolonged slavery. Being free to live their lives again. They truly were all starting again in more ways than one, so why not grab life for all it's worth? Point being, many nobles were left disgruntled when their applications for building lavish crystal mansions on site were justifiably denied by the local princess.
Crystal Empire, prepare to disembark,
came another announcement, and Twilight was knocked from her ruminations to see that the train was slowly pulling into a newly constructed station at the very edge of the city. The train gave a hiss as its air brakes kicked in, and it pulled into a steady stop at the platform. The station was quite small and rudimentary, constructed of wood rather than crystal, all due to the hasty nature of its construction. It would probably be upgraded to crystal later. Still, it served its purpose well enough, judging by the ponies already disembarking and, in a scant few cases, boarding. Twilight, too, levitated up her saddlebags and replaced them onto her back. She opened the blinds before stepping out the doorway and into the corridor, carefully making her way past the other departing ponies towards the nearest exit. When she got there, Twilight hopped down onto the platform and allowed herself to breathe a sigh of relief. As Twilight gave the platform a look over, letting the fresh air wash over her as she stretched out her stiff limbs, she remained unaware of a presence carefully watching her away from prying eyes. It stayed in the corners, the dark places where ponies didn't take much notice. And it recognized this pony. One of them. And she was just what it needed. Twilight took satisfaction as she finished ridding herself of the small aches in her joints, turning to face the train as it finished unloading its passengers before the doors closed up again. This was followed by another hiss as the brakes were released, and the train began to pull away once more. As it moved, one of the grand highways leading straight up to the Crystal Palace became visible, filled to the brim with ponies going about their daily lives. The highway was lined with homes and businesses for as far as the eye could see, and intersected with smaller streets connecting the whole city together. It would be a long, if interesting, walk up. However, Twilight wouldn't have to walk. Twilight departed the station and crossed over to the Crystal Empire itself, walking towards the lavishly decorated crystalline carriage waiting for her. 2 purple stallions in the armor of the Crystal Guard were hitched to the front, and another opened the door to the wagon upon spotting the unicorn and gave her a respectful nod. "Miss Sparkle?" The guard greeted with a hint of reverence that made Twilight inwardly cringe. He came from being one of the ponies who saved the city when it returned, as well as being Princess Cadence's sister-in-law, as well as Prince Consort Shining Armor's biological sister. Even when she was Princess Celestia's personal protege, that in itself being quite a respected position, she never got quite as much recognition as she'd been getting since the Summer Sun celebration that marked Luna's own return to the throne. Neither was it something she was particularly used to, or ever would be.
"Thank you,"
Twilight said to the pony as he helped her up into the carriage.
"Is every pony else already here?"
"I believe there are 1 or 2 stragglers, but they should arrive soon," the guard explained as he also stepped up into the carriage and closed the door behind him, signaling the ponies out front to start moving. "Prince Shining Armor has commanded me to bring you straight to the throne room. I believe the others are eager to begin."
"I know I am,"
she replied brightly. "We'll be sure that the Crystal Guard will do its part to protect the expedition from whatever foul things the tyrant might have kept hidden." The stallion spat with barely restrained hatred to his former slaver. "Might I speak freely, ma'am?" Twilight blinked.
"I guess?"
"I cannot thank you and your friends enough for what you and the princess achieved. Ending that monster, freeing us, avenging our queen," he said, though it caused Twilight to inwardly frown at the word avenged. Revenge had never been her intent, only to help those who needed it. "And, might I ask, is not Sir Spike with you?" The sudden eagerness and hopeful nature of his tone made Twilight smirk. All of them had received a celebratory status among the Crystal Ponies for what they'd achieved, but Spike most of all for being the one to ultimately deliver the Crystal Heart back to its podium.
"I'm afraid he's back in Ponyville,"
she answered, seeing the pony's immediate disappointment.
"But he wanted to come. Maybe next time?"
He brightened a little. "I'll hope that he does. I don't believe he's seen the statue yet." Twilight stopped.
"Statue?"
He grinned. Why, yes. The statue to honor his delivering of the heart. Spike had a statue. Oh dear. This was never going to be forgotten by the prideful Drake. Well, she just let Spike discover that for himself.
Well, I'm sure he'll be thrilled.
Twilight stated honestly.
I don't think I ever got your name, Mr.
Crystal Shield. Private Crystal Shield, he replied. Or at least that's the new rank that the princess introduced for my level. It was apprentice before.
You were a guard for Queen Amore?
I was in my first week when Sombra did his little coup, Crystal Shield explained, and Twilight bit her lip at his suddenly haunted expression. We never saw it coming. I couldn't even imagine. Amora was dead before we even knew what was happening. And there I was, on my first week when even my instructors hadn't a clue what we were supposed to do.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked.
It's fine, he assured her. Just... next thing any of us knew, our armor had been taken from us and replaced with chains. Many of my friends were taken for his army. Had those helmets forced onto them. Those green eyes. I didn't even know who I was.
It sounds horrible.
It was. But that's over now. The bastard is dead, and I got to finally be a guard. Adapting has been strange, but worth it. All worked out in the end.
I'm glad you think so,
Twilight replied.
Aren't the other crystal ponies okay with everything?
Thanks to your brother and Princess Miyamura Cadenza, I'd say so, he answered. It's a long process, but we're working through it. But I must admit, I'm not overly keen on going into that tyrant's little lair.
A lot of Queen Amora's personal items are probably down there,
Twilight pointed out.
I know what you went through is terrible, but I don't think it should be forgotten and left behind. There's so much history to be found.
I don't know about any of that. But it'll be worth it to free the Queen's personal possessions from his clutches, Crystal Shield mused. She deserves that much from us. But I was more referring to just being there, so close to his dark magic. Twilight nodded in understanding.
Well, I know I'll feel better with you there to keep an eye on us, Crystal Shield.
The young guard smiled. That's kind of you to say, ma'am. What was left of the journey was spent mostly in silence, Twilight looking out of the window and watching as the crystal buildings all passed them by. A shadow began to creep over the carriage, however, and that signaled Twilight that they were pulling up to the entrance of the palace. The carriage did a small turn, allowing the idly spinning crystal heart to be seen from where Twilight was sitting. Her escort then proceeded to get out of the opposite side of the carriage before he walked around and back to Twilight's door, opening it and generously offering a hoof to help her out. Twilight accepted the help, climbing down from the carriage before Crystal Shield closed the door behind her and gave a quick shout at the other guards to depart. Welcome back to the Crystal Empire, Miss Sparkle, the stallion said.
Thank you, Crystal Shield,
Twilight responded.
And it's just Twilight, please.
Very well, Twilight. The guard frowned, taking note of the other silver-armored mares and stallions guarding the various entrances and patrolling around the palace's perimeter. As you can see, we've established a 24-hour watch on the heart, seeing as it's what keeps the frozen north out of the city.
Shining Armor's done a lot to remake the old Crystal Guard, huh?
Twilight noted. Your brother is an inspiration, he complimented. We've learned a lot from him, and not just Equestria's latest tactics, though the majority of the new Crystal Guard are transfers from Princess Celestia's Solar Guard and, in a few select cases, from the EUP army. Twilight gave him a sad smile.
Right. You said that your friends were forced into Sombra's army.
Too many. And they were all outside the city when we moved.
Would love to hear about them later, if it's no trouble to you,
Twilight requested gingerly.
I'm here as a historian first and foremost, and I think their story should be told.
Yeah, I suppose they should, he agreed, if a little hesitantly. I'll stop by your group when my shift ends. Then, well, I guess we'll see.
Thank you. That sounds perfect.
Yeah. Anyway, I still need to deliver you to the throne room. Please, follow me. Twilight gave a brisk nod and followed his lead as they were allowed into one of the 4 entrances and ascended the staircase up to the main body of the palace. Crystal Shield led her through corridor after corridor, all of which looked so different now that Twilight wasn't in a race against time to defeat a shadow monster from the distant past. All the while, she remained ignorant of the shadow following her now. Here we are, Crystal Shield announced as they reached the pair of large crystal doors, which she placed a hoof on before swinging them open. The princess and the others are all waiting inside, Twilight.
I appreciate it, Crystal Shield,
she thanked the stallion, before joining him and heading on inside, and beholding all the others within. Immediately obvious was the tall pink pony sitting on the throne. An alicorn, Princess Miyamori Cadenza. Or Cadence, Twilight's sister-in-law and former foal-sitter. Sitting next to the throne was an alabaster stallion in his old guard armor from when he was the captain of the Solar Guard, rather than the prince of the Crystal Empire. This was Twilight's brother, Shining Armor. Around the 2 royals was a gathered collection of guards, some of them crystal ponies, while others were equestrians who had come to the Crystal Empire with their former captain. They were all around the outside of the room, looking after the other gathered unicorns that were clustered in the center in various deep conversation. All unicorns from Celestia's school. Some were alumni, like Twilight. Some were professors, and 1 or 2 were even particularly promising students accompanying their teachers. All of them had been personally selected by Celestia herself to research the history of the Crystal Empire, on the Princess of the Sun's behalf. Twilight's earlier excitement was returning fast. "Twily!" Shining Armor announced on spotting his sister, quickly trotting over to her while Cadence arose from her throne and followed on. "There you are, kid. Knew we couldn't keep you away from something like this."
I do have the key,
Twilight jokingly pointed out, gesturing towards her horn. She then moved forwards and embraced her sibling lovingly.
I missed you, BBBFF.
"Same here, LSBFF," he responded in kind before breaking off the embrace. "Though I wish it was on more social grounds rather than going into creepy evil dungeons of doom."
Excuse his vocabulary. He and some of his buddies from his guard days have been playing ogres and oubliettes,
Cadence said with a chuckle as she walked up to her sister-in-law.
Not that it isn't apt, mind. Cadence!
Twilight greeted enthusiastically.
Should you start or shall I? I always lead,
Cadence replied jokingly.
Try to keep up. Sunshine, sunshine, ladybugs awake. Clap your hooves and do a little shake.
Always with the chant, Shining said with a mirthful roll of his eyes.
Because it's amazing,
Cadence rebuffed, whacking Shining playfully with her wing.
Yeah, Shiny,
Twilight concurred.
Anyways, we all know you're just jealous that you didn't think of it first.
Oh, don't start with that, Shining replied in bemusement. I've had enough of you two teaming up against me when you were a filly, Twilight.
And may it never change,
Cadence remarked, sharing a hoof bump with her sister-in-law. All right, princess, come on. We still have an evil lair to search.
Wait, aren't we still waiting on a few ponies?
Twilight asked them as they moved back towards the larger group.
Crystal Shield said there were some stragglers. They can join when they arrive, but now that you're here, I don't think the rest of these ponies will have to wait.
No, we will not, chirped a stallion who emerged from the group before the 2 royals and their sister. Pardon my intrusion, but I think we're all too eager to unlock all the historical value in this sanctum. My mind races at the possible finds. The stallion had a dark purple coat and a rather unkempt blue mane. On his muzzle was a pair of black-rimmed glasses, and he held a pair of saddlebags on his back that was marked with his cutie mark, that being a dark purple horn that was surrounded by a lavender magic aura, not dissimilar from Twilight's own. "Twilight Sparkle," the stallion greeted. "A pleasure to see you again." Twilight blinked.
I'm sorry, but I don't think I know you.
"Understandable. We were but fools," he responded. "My name is Shadowflare. We were in a couple of Princess Celestia's seminars together back during our days at her school."
Oh, I see. Sorry, I never really got to know anyone else in my years at Celestia's school beyond a few.
Twilight explained apologetically. "Again, understandable. Most of us took classes, but you tended to have private lessons with Princess Celestia as her protege. It's only natural that you wouldn't have interacted overly much with the rest of the student body." "And rarely getting your head out of a book," Shining jabbed.
Shush!
Twilight scolded lightly, flicking him with her tail.
But thank you, Shadowflare. It's nice to make your acquaintance again anyway. You're gonna get going?
"Outlandishly so," he replied cheerily. "I can scarcely imagine all the secrets locked away in the sanctum of King Sombra's. I think this will be a very productive day indeed."
Well, then I shouldn't keep you all waiting,
Twilight decided.
But, I might need a moment to get this right.
"All right, every pony clear the way," Shining Armor commanded, and the guard immediately moved to clear the area before the throne, until only the two royals and Twilight Sparkle remained. "All right, all yours, Twilight."
Thanks,
she said to her brother as he and Cadence also moved off to the side, standing just by Shadowflare and Crystal Shield.
Okay, I can do this.
Twilight planted herself in front of the throne, thinking back on that day 3 months prior. How she had opened the gateway with a spell of dark magic. Recalling the process, she scrunched her eyes shut and focused on all the negative emotions that one would usually keep under lock and key. All the times one of her friends had irritated her, like when Rainbow Dash would keep crashing into her library despite Twilight always telling her to be careful. For added negativity, she also recalled what Sombra had put her through. The vision of her worst fear. Celestia's abandonment and disappointment. A spark of pain and anger from the memory lit inside her, and she felt a sick bubbling make its way up her horn, and it felt like her eyes were starting to leak something. There were several gasps around her, as a splitting headache also made itself known within Twilight's skull, and she resisted the urge to scream as she quickly let loose the one dark magic spell she knew towards the throne itself. She let go of those bad feelings, letting the dark magic fade away and leave her system completely. The magic reacted with the throne, and a shadow spread out as Twilight took a step back before revealing the entrance to a staircase that, given the design of the palace, simply shouldn't exist in the same space. "Fascinating," Shadowflare muttered in awe. "Not the word I'd use," Crystal Shield noted with a wince. "Is she okay?" "Twilight?" Shining Armor stepped forward in concern, his sister standing still with a hoof on her head and her features still scrunched in pain.
Yeah, fine,
Twilight replied, shaking her head a little and trying to be rid of the sudden cobwebs overtaking her brain.
It was worse than I remembered, that's all. Here,
Cadence said, stepping forward and lighting her horn with cyan magic. Twilight seemed to relax in sigh in relief as the spell washed over her, her eyes becoming less glazed.
To help with the headache. Thanks, Cadence.
All right, ponies, Shining Armor announced. Crystal Guard, let's escort these unicorns down to the bottom. Stay sharp and evacuate on the first sign of trouble. Let's move it! The guard jumped into action, herding the scholars together and beginning to lead them down. Twilight took the rear for the time being, standing near her brother, Crystal Shield, and Shadowflare as they prepared to descend.
I'll see you when you return,
Cadence said, silently wishing she could go with them, if only to make sure everything would be fine. But some pony had to run the kingdom while they were tomb raiding.
Be careful.
Always, Shining replied, just as they started down the stairs, quickly fading from view.